that brings me to something I was perhaps going to come to later, is in what comes after this. But I mean, this feels like the right point to jump into it. I take it you're a bit of a gold guy. I think there's like AU at the end of your Twitter handle or something like that. So I'm
Yeah.
taking it that you're a bit of a gold guy. But you've just
Yeah.
laid out the reason as to why the future probably doesn't look like, if assuming that something bad happens. If the dollar gets too strong, it becomes everybody's problem, and they've got to find an alternative, right? And the alternative, I don't think, can be gold because of the reasons you've just laid out. Is China going to trust the US when they say how much gold they've got? You need transactions to be relatively fast, and you're going to need to know what the counterparty actually has. And so for all of those reasons, it kind of pushes gold out of the system because of that lack of... The logic of gold is that you need to centralize because you need to be able to verify.
Yep.
So if the entire world agrees to go back to having all of their gold under the Bank of England, and then they verify, but I don't think we're in that world anymore where anyone is going to let anyone else have their gold, and that sort of forces you, if you're not using the dollar and you're not using gold, well, is it Bitcoin?
So I don't think it's Bitcoin either. And the reason I say I don't think this doesn't mean that Bitcoin could go to $1 million and still not be the global reserve currency. Could be a fantastic investment, could be a fantastic store of value. But part of the reason that we're in this mess, and part of the ways we're talking about that they would get out of this mess, all has to do with the government staying in control. Governments do not want to give up control of their currency. The reason they don't want to give up control of their currency is they don't like, for two reasons, actually. Number one, they don't like having handcuffs put on them. If they want to do a project or invest in something or build something, they don't want somebody to tell them no, which a gold standard effectively does, or some other currency, whether it was Bitcoin or something else. The other thing is that, and this starts to get a little bit philosophical, but I would argue that money is a control mechanism as much as it is anything else. And it's probably the biggest tool of control that a country has, next to violence, right? You know, countries typically have a monopoly on violence and money. And I think the fact that the reason they have a monopoly on those two things is very telling, right? And it could be argued that they're not that farly separated. And so, my guess is that what comes next, as opposed to it being gold or Bitcoin, is some new type of fiat, and some kind of a fiat that probably is a combination of forced down from the top, but also generally accepted from the bottom as some. So whether that's a combination of commodities, oil, gold, maybe a basket of currencies and some commodities, but I think
haven't you just suggested basically what the BRICS are doing?
Except for the BRICS haven't really done anything. I mean, this is I laugh because the BRICS as a group are very formidable if they were in fact a group, and if they were in fact loyal to each other, and if they were in fact committed to actually going through the pain it would take to unify. I mean, they have huge economies, they have huge populations, they control a huge amount of the world's natural resources. The demographics in some cases are better than those of the West. You got to take China out of there because their demographics are horrible. But I don't talk down about the BRICS because I don't think that these are important, economies or powers. They are. But all of those countries, you talk about the BRICS, all of them on an individual basis have all the same problems that the United States do, and in many cases more so than the United States does. And they don't have near the amount of the advantages that the United States does. And if you want to have some fun, go get the communique that's put out at the end of every BRICS meeting for the last 16 years. Started in 2009 and go 2010, 11, 12. Read them all. You can basically rearrange the sentences, and it's the same comment year after year after year after year. We are looking at the potential to develop a plan that may one day come into the possibility of and it's always in the future. It's always in the future. It's always in the future. But there haven't really been any concrete steps taken. There's been a lot of concrete headlines put out, and there has been some concrete establishment of, and then they will do like some small little token transaction to say, look, see, it can be done. Maybe it's an energy company in Brazil selling $1 million worth of oil to China in yuan. And they say, see, look, this works. But it's not being done on scale. It's not being done by the general public. It's not being adopted by corporations. And when you look at the actual implementation of these ideas that the BRICS put forth, there's very, very little evidence that they've actually accomplished anything.
So I agree with that. The only thing I would say is that we all, including BRICS governments, tend to follow the path of least resistance. And for a very long time, the dollar was such the obvious choice because it had that huge depth of liquidity. If you wanted to trade $3 billion worth of oil between, I don't know, Brazil and Saudi Arabia, you obviously you go to dollars because it's got that depth of liquidity right there. But somebody did push this along, and it was Joe Biden, because he, depending on how you look at it, froze, stole, whatever, 300 billion of Russian central bank dollar-denominated assets. Now, from that point onwards, I think a lot of the rest of the world would have realized, oh, right, okay, actually, this dollar weapon will actually be used as a weapon. And the message was pretty overt, it's the dollar is not apolitical, it is political, and it can be used like a weapon. And now the imperative to have an alternative, even if it's not a particularly good alternative, but have an alternative up your sleeve, that's a lot more pressing than it was before Joe did that.
So I agree with that. And I think this sort of gets back to the point we were making at the very beginning. It's not that de-dollarization isn't possible. De-dollarization is possible. And if people are forced to de-dollarize, either because their reserves are getting stolen or because they choose to no longer use it and use something else, there is that possibility. My argument is that they cannot do that without pain. So in other words, all of that US dollar debt that we talked about, it exists. It is there. So if the rest of the world stops using dollars and starts using something else, maybe it's a BRICS currency or it's Bitcoin or it's gold or whatever it is, right? Okay. So there's three things here. They still have to deal with that debt. They still have to pay off that US dollar debt, service that dollar debt. And if they don't, then all of that euro dollar debt that we talked about goes poof and disappears. And so not only are their liabilities disappearing, but all the assets disappear with it. Because, in this US dollar credit that's been extended, on the one side of the ledger, it's a credit, but on the other side of the ledger, it's somebody else's asset. So if they choose to go away from the dollar, then they have to agree, kind of uniformly agree, that we're going to suffer the loss of this huge amount of assets. And that would cause a huge credit contraction. And in that credit contraction, I would argue the US dollar would spike. And that would be how you get your DXY jumping to 130, 140, 150. And that causes such disruption that they have to reset everything. And then the milkshake's probably over, and now we're on to something else. But I don't think you can transition from here to the way you're discussing without the dollar going higher.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay, so So I have to remember that you're not ruling out all of this other stuff. You're just saying that the dollar milkshake is the path to getting to all of that. All roads go through a much higher dollar, which then causes such a problem for everybody that they have to look at an alternative. So what does it look like when? How do you know that we are in the final steps of this process? I mean, what things start happening to make you think, okay, we're truly in the end game of the dollar milkshake theory now?
So I think there would be a couple things. I think, and I don't like these things, but this is what I think would probably happen. is I think you would see the dollar start to stair step higher and probably gap higher in certain cases. So maybe it goes from 105 to 117, right? And I don't think this will all happen at once. I think it'll be a stair step, up and down and up and down. But you'll see the dollar start gapping higher. You will start to see some individual countries blow up as we move. And because I think these countries to de-dollarize, they're going to have to go through pain. So if I see them start to go through the pain and willingly go through this pain because their stated claim is we know this is happening, it's happening because we're de-dollarizing and we are committed to doing it, that would be a signal. The other thing would be is if you started to see corporations, not just the governments saying we're going to do this, but if you started to see corporations and global banks stop using the dollar and start using some other currency more so than they're using the dollar, and start extending credit and accepting as collateral things other than the dollar, that would be another thing. I also think that there would likely be some regional conflicts, hopefully not war, but I would expect that to happen. And then I would expect, and you've already seen Trump say this to a certain extent, if countries stop using the dollar, then they will no longer do business with the United States, because the United States is not going to do business in any currency other than the dollar. The United States is not going to accept yuan for Chinese goods. We're not going to pay China yuan to get whatever they send us. We're going to pay dollars. So if these other countries say we are no longer going to accept your dollars, and the U.S. says you are no longer going to do business in the United States, and these other countries say, okay, no problem, we will deal with the pain associated with that, that would be another thing. And then finally, I would argue again that if the U.S. had to use its military to enforce the U.S. dollar as the most commonly used currency in the world, I think they would do it. I don't think they have to do that right now because I think the market does their job for them. I think you mean in certain episodes, or you mean currently?
No. I mean, what was really behind, say, Iraq or?
I think that's fair. Yeah, that's fair. I would agree with that. I would agree with that, and I would expect more of that to happen if we were really moving towards an end game where the dollar was seriously being rejected by the rest of the world. Now, see, the other thing is, what's the right way to say that? Russia's a pretty unique example. So you use the example of us taking Russia's reserves. And Russia has kind of said, that sucks. That's illegal. But you know what? It's probably worth it as we, try to de-dollarize. Putin has said something to that effect. And they are sort of able to get away with it because they're Russia. They're a huge country. They're a huge military power, and they have enormous natural resources, the most important of which is energy, which the rest of the world needs. There are very few other countries that could stand up and do the same thing that Russia did, right? Because they're not as big, they don't have the military, and they don't have the resources to do that to the United States. So even though they might not like the New Deal with the United States, what are they going to do about it? Right now, again, I don't necessarily like this, but this is kind of reality. The other thing that I think people don't realize, even as Russia has stood up to the United States in this way and quote unquote moved towards de-dollarization, they still accept dollars for their energy. They publicly say we will only sell our energy in rubles. Okay. How do you get rubles? Well, the only place they exist is in Russia, because nobody in Brazil uses rubles. Nobody in Australia uses rubles. Nobody in Korea uses rubles. So the only place you can get rubles is from Russia. So how do you get rubles from Russia? Well, you buy them from Russia. Okay, so what does Russia take in exchange for their rubles? They take dollars. So if you want to buy Russian energy, you wire money, you wire dollars or euros to Gazprom Bank. Gazprom Bank takes the dollars and gives you the rubles. And then they give the dollars to the central bank of Russia. You take the rubles and buy the energy from Russia. So yeah, did you use rubles to buy Russian energy? Yes, you did, but you paid for the rubles in dollars. And now Russia has dollars as a result. So the point is not that it can't be done. It's that it's just really, really, really hard to do it. And there's pain involved in doing it. And so I think if there's this myth that de-dollarization will happen, it will happen smoothly, the rest of the world will flourish, and the United States will end up a heap of ashes, I think that vision is completely incorrect. It's not that it can't happen, but I think that vision is just not reality.
So do you think that this gives, in the final stages of fiat money, the US sufficient leverage and power that they get to be basically chairing the discussion of what comes next? Because there was talk over the tariff era. It was almost like Scott Bessent was hinting. I don't even know if he was hinting. I think he might have even outright said it. But there needs to be a new accord, and he wants to be leading that discussion. So it feels like there are elements in the administration that know something is coming, and okay, I'd rather the dollar hegemony lasted as long as possible. But if a new system comes along, then we want to be there chairing the meeting when it's discussed.
Yeah. I think that is probably the most likely scenario. As I play out the probabilities in my mind, I think that is the highest probability. You got to remember, nobody wants global chaos. It's not good for anybody, right? And everybody wants the biggest piece of the pie they can possibly get. But nobody wants the pie to blow up and just go all over the place, because that's just not productive. The question becomes, how hard do they fight over who gets the biggest piece, and what are the ramifications of that fight? I think there's kind of three possible scenarios. One, I think we could potentially have some kind of a fracturing of globalization where we go back to regionalized economies, and those regionalized economies are somewhat self-contained. Maybe we've got Eurasia in one region, maybe we've got North and South America in another, and maybe we've got Africa and Europe in the other one, or something like that, right? I could see, and perhaps in each of those they have their own money or predominant form of medium of exchange. I think that's possible. I think one is just a complete collapse where it's just a total disaster where, economies are blowing up, buildings are blowing up because bombs are flying, just utter chaos. I think that's a real possibility. I actually put that lower on the probability list, but I think it's possible.
If you would like to see the full version of this premium video, please head over to lotuseaters.com and subscribe to gain full access to all of our premium content.